Good morning, Laura. Thank you very much for joining me this morning to talk about your fantastic quilt. For anyone encountering the 80 Candles quilt for the first time, could you explain how it came into being and what it represents, please?
Yeah, of course. Good morning. So the 80 Candles quilt is a collaboratively produced quilt. Um, the project came about because of Holocaust Memorial Day 2025, which marked 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust were looking for artists to create 80 candlesticks. Now, of course, I don't make candlesticks. I'm a community artist and I specialize in large scale textiles. But the theme to me of 80 candles just spoke as a quilt, which I thought that kind of sense of comfort and nurturing and wrapping people in a quilt just seemed really perfect for this really difficult theme. So I put together a series of workshops and I invited people from across the East Midlands to get involved to make a square dedicated to one person affected by the Nazi regime. So in total, 76 people joined me, and we held workshops across the East Midlands, including the Multi-Faith Centre in Derby, the National Holocaust Centre, a couple of venues in Ashbourne, including churches and community halls. So people came along to these workshops and they chose a person that they wanted to research affected by the Nazi regime. And there were no boundaries around that choice. What we were hoping to do with this quilt was to humanize those that were affected. So I wanted people to help to tell the breadth of the story. We often have a very narrow view of the Holocaust and who was affected. And I wanted people to dig a little deeper into that. So participants went and chose a person that they were interested in, perhaps someone that they had somehow a personal connection with. For many of our participants, I worked really closely with Derbyshire Jewish community. For many of them, they have told really personal stories. So it's family members or friends, family members. And then for other people, they chose them because of a name connection or a shared hobby, just something that they felt that they could perhaps see themselves in. And then they went off and they did their own personal research and then came along to workshops and in some way tried to tell the story of that person in stitch. So each of the 80 squares has a candle, the name of the person, and then an indication of that person's life and experience during the Holocaust.
Thank you, Laura. Now, we had the privilege last year of featuring your beautiful quilt in our visitor information centre. And when we met with you and had a viewing together with you, you were able to share some of our stories. However, this year you have turned the 80 Candles quilt into a book. What prompted you to turn the quilt into a book and give each square its own story?
It was the participants. I'll be honest, I have never written a book before. This is so out of my comfort zone. But the participants found that they felt a huge responsibility to the peoples whose stories they had documented. The act of personally researching those stories and then stitching them, which takes time. They sat for hours with that person's story, really thinking about them. And they all, I would say, felt the need to share that story further. And so I was contacted, people started talking in workshops about how are we going to share these stories. So we produced a mini pamphlet that went along with the quilt when it was exhibited. And people that were viewing the quilt started to say, we really want to know the stories. So very quickly, I was put under quite a lot of pressure to make this into a book and ensure that the stories that had been collated, people got the opportunity to share even further.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Were there any squares or stories that surprised or moved you more deeply as you worked on the book?
I will be really honest and say writing this book has been the hardest thing I've ever done. The project itself, as we were making the quilt, was a really heavy experience. The 80 stories, the 80 individuals became, for me especially, I became connected to them in a very personal way. And then having to write those stories and do the research and do the fact checking, they became more and more human to me, every single one of them. And the experiences of all of them have lessons to teach us in terms of resilience, compassion, the joy of life, and that we all need to grab life with both hands, but also that we owe people to tell these stories forward. And it is important that we share the humanity of each and one of the individuals affected, but also that we bring that into life today and that we actively practice compassion and don't put people in boxes and label them.
Thank you, Laura. And that brings me on to this year's theme for Holocaust Memorial Day for 2026, which focuses on bridging generations. In what ways do you feel that the book helps connect younger generations with the experiences of those who lived through the Holocaust?
I think the participants that created the quilt became bridges themselves. And I know that many of them outside of the publication of this book have gone on to share what they have learned with other people, and that it has encouraged conversations not in just homes, but also much in broader community context. We were really lucky that a number of young people took part in the project. We did a workshop at Queen Elizabeth Grammar School, and students took part in the project and created squares themselves. So I think the project itself started to act as a bridge. The participants that took part acted as a bridge and continue to as they share those stories. And now we have this fabulous book, which also further documents those stories and starts to give people an understanding of the breadth of experience and the breadth of people that were targeted and suffered, but also the number of people that helped and the smaller acts that people did. And I think we all love stories. Stories are very intrinsic to how we understand the world. And I hope that these stories will continue to be told, especially as we start to have fewer and fewer survivors are able to tell their story personally.
Thank you, Laura. I think we all agree with you that that your quilt and your book really does support bridging generations, and hopefully it's something that lasts in history. Why do you think that creative projects like quilts and storytelling can sometimes reach people more effectively than traditional history books?
That's a really, really good question. And it is what my whole career is about. I truly believe in the power of creating and art to engage people at a very deep level. I I think specifically stitching is a really slow process. And so you get time to think and you really get time to connect with the subject that you are thinking about. And often people do a little and then they go away and then they come back and do a little more. So I think it's that active, focused concentration for the participants. And then I think for people that view the quilt, it is art talks to us, doesn't it? We can, something that we can feel and touch really does affect you at a much deeper level.
Thank you, Laura. That brings me on to my next question, which is, if the book and quilt could speak to future generations many years from now, what message would you hope that they pass on?
To speak up when others are silenced.
I think that's really powerful. Thank you. And finally, Laura, Holocaust Memorial Day is on the 27th of January 2026. Where can we buy a copy of your book and potentially see the quilt?
So the quilt is in 3 locations on Tuesday. So it starts at the Multi-Faith Centre in Derby, and then we go to Matlock, and then we go to Chesterfield in the afternoon. The book will be available at each venue, but you can also go to my website, everystitcherstory.co.uk, and all the information is on there.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much for your time this morning to answer our questions, and we wish you every success with the book.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.